All right, Alexander, let's do an update on Belarus and Poland and the border dispute and what's going on there. Real quick, Alexander, I know someone in Belarus who told me this morning, actually, that why does the EU always attack us? Why are they always attacking us? I thought I'm trying to remember some of the comments. I thought the EU wants migrants. How come they don't want these migrants? Why should we take care of these migrants? Poland should not be burdened with these migrants. See, this is what I heard from someone in Belarus. It's unfair to burden Poland with these migrants as well. The other thing that I heard is confirmation that, yes, since the EU sanctioned us and stopped flights coming into Belarus and Minsk, we've had to conduct a lot more flights going to Turkey and Egypt as well. I mean, Russia, Turkey, and Egypt. That's pretty much where all of the Belavia flights are going now, because what do you expect for Belavia to close, the national carrier? No, so they just had to up flights to those areas. So, what do you expect us to do? Anyway, interesting comments. You can get into this story. Maybe there's some comments that I relayed to you that could tie into your explanation or your roundup as to what's going on.
Well, absolutely. There's two ways of looking at this. I mean, the one is that Lukashenko is this great villain who's orchestrated all of this. He's doing essentially what Erdogan repeatedly, and by the way, successfully does, threatens the EU and extorts money from them because he's got this vast army of potential migrants in Turkey who he's able to transfer to the EU, and you can turn the tap on and the tap off as he chooses. So, that's one way of looking at this. The fundamental problem I have with that theory is that there just aren't enough migrants on the border and in Belarus to make that a really, as I said, logical explanation. Now, we started thinking that there were 4,000 of them on the border, in the camps there. It's now been scaled down to 2,000. Let me repeat again. Last week, we had 1,000 migrants crossing into Britain in just one day. From France into Britain in just one day. I have completely lost count now of the number of migrants that are crossing the US border from Mexico. Is France trying to destabilize Britain? Is Mexico trying to destabilize the United States? This is, I think, completely overblown. But there are some people, it seems to me, who are deliberately trying to use this problem. And by the way, as I understand it, both the Russians and Putin and Belarus are now saying, look, help us to deal with this, give us money, we will create camps, we will find a way to deal with the situation. But we do need your help, because ultimately we can't just cope with this problem by ourselves. And I should say that the EU High Representative for External Affairs, Josep Borrell, who is completely incompetent and unbelievably arrogant, by the way, but nonetheless, he does have that role. He did do what the Russians have been urging the EU and Merkel to do. He picked up the telephone and he spoke to Mackay, who is the Belarusian foreign minister. So at last, there's been that dialogue with Belarus that was entirely missing from this. I think this problem is going to be sorted, actually, over the next few weeks, and probably in an effective way. But as I said, this whole thing has been massively stirred up and orchestrated. And I've been wondering whether Poland had something to do with it. But I now think that you got to look at your explanation somewhere else. And I say that because we've now got comments from none other than Tony Blinken, who seems to be determined to make things with every country that the United States has to deal with, China, Russia, worse. And Tony Blinken has come up with this theory, which he's now advanced and which he's appearing all over the media, that it's the Russians who are somehow, not the Belarusians, it's the Russians who are behind this crisis on the Polish border, and that they're doing that to conceal their dark plans for this invasion of Ukraine that they're supposedly plotting in January. An invasion of Ukraine, which the Ukrainians themselves say they see no sign of. So I mean, the whole thing is bizarre and very weird, but it's beginning to look to me increasingly as if the people who are game planning this, again, are our old friends, the neocons in Washington. They are looking for another excuse to start a crisis in Eastern Europe, probably specifically in Ukraine. And they've also, I suspect, worked up this situation on the border. They've probably been giving bad advice to the Poles. They've been spreading all these stories about a massive buildup of Russian forces on the Ukrainian border, a buildup which the US Department of Defense has denied, which Ukraine has also denied, which the outgoing British Chief of Staff seems to be bewildered by, and which at the same time they want to talk up, even though, as I said, it has no reality.
Yeah, the EU also said that they've gotten the framework ready for sanctions, more sanctions on Belarus, and more sanctions on. They got the framework for sanctions on airlines. I'm not saying they're going to put sanctions on airlines, but they said they have the framework worked out so that they can sanction airlines that are supposedly are moving migrants into Belarus, whatever that means. To me, that would just be the nuclear bomb for this dispute to get ratcheted up.
Well, indeed,
to level 12 if they were to actually go down that road. But yeah, Blinken, the neocons. Poland needs to stop listening to these guys. That's Poland's biggest weakness when it comes to foreign policies. They have too much neocon influence embedded into the country, and that's a bad thing.
It is an extremely bad thing. By the way, on those sanctions, I predict that sooner or later they will happen. You call it the nuclear bomb. There's a very famous quote by the Russian playwright Chekhov, who says that if you have a loaded gun, in the first act of a play, then by the time the play finishes, that gun will have been fired. And the same with sanctions. If you have a loaded gun, in other words, prepared sanctions ready, sooner or later that gun, those sanctions, will be fired, will be shot. And of course, who will pay the price? Airlines in Europe. Because, of course, the Russians have already made it very clear that if their airline Aeroflot is sanctioned, which of course I'm sure is in the sights, well, Russian airspace is closed to European carriers. So you're shooting yourself in the foot. Aeroflot will survive because it's a partly state-run airline, and it's got massive businesses all over the Asia-Pacific region. But the many European airlines will not, because, of course, adding 5 hours to their flights to Asia is going to make their Asian business impossible. They will be obliterated by the Asian carriers.
Not to mention the travel and tourism industry in South Europe.
Absolutely.
Would just be completely decimated.
Absolutely.
Decimated.
Absolutely.
But, so Blinken, why does he want to push for conflict with Russia so bad?
Well,
isn't it interesting too how they've kind of forgotten? I don't want to say forgotten, but they've put Taiwan in a back burner. It's to me, it's like they'll focus on Taiwan a little bit, for like a month or two, and China's the enemy, and then Taiwan. Then they kind of leave it simmering a little. Then they focus on Russia, Ukraine. Then they leave that simmering. Then they go back to China, Taiwan. It's like they keep on going back and forth.
It's unbelievably restless. It's this constant agitation to start to pick a fight somewhere with someone. And that, I'm afraid, very much the characteristic of neocon, liberal interventionist sort of attitudes, that you can't just leave things alone. You can't leave things to sort themselves out by themselves. You have to create trouble. You have to create trouble in Ukraine. I get the impression, by the way, that even Ukraine is bewildered by some of these messages, and they're getting contradictory advice from different people. One group of people, probably the Germans, tell them, for heaven's sake, don't start a war. Then they're hearing people like Blinken coming along, talking about support for Ukraine being rock solid and all those sort of things. The same with Taiwan. They just can't leave these things alone, and as a result, they are marching us forward towards some sort of debacle. Now, why are they doing it? Well, they're doing it because that's what neocons do. As we've discussed many times, these people have no reverse gear. For them, it's either win, it's always win or lose. There is no middle way. There's no negotiation. There's no discussion. There's no conciliation. And the president, ineffective, empty suit, as he basically is, talks about wanting a predictable and stable relationship with the Russians. He had that meeting back in June, you remember, with Putin, in which he was talking about all of those things. And to the extent that that was ever a reality, Blinken is undermining it because he's talking all the time in this overblown way. And of course, the result is, as I said, a festering crisis in Eastern Europe, which could very easily spin out of control. And you mentioned Taiwan. Blinken was up to it again with Taiwan. He was talking to the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, saying things to Wang Yi, which apparently, raised Chinese hackles, even as the Chinese and American presidents are due to have a virtual meeting within a few days. So, I mean, he seems to be doing this all the time. Whenever there look to be attempts by someone to try to ease tensions, Blinken comes along and aggravates them.
Yeah, I believe the State Department is the foreign policy of the Biden, quote unquote, the Biden administration, is captured by the neocon Clinton wing of things, while the domestic side seems to be more under the Obama Rice, with the exception of, say, maybe Burns at the CIA. That's more Obama's domain, while the State Department foreign policy, Sullivan, Blinken, all of these, Newland, all of these characters on foreign policy are definitely part of the Clinton neocon White House. I mean, it's like you have really two White Houses. They're battling it out. Absolutely. But you have the Obama faction, which is definitely in control of much of the surveillance state and the domestic side of things. And then you have the Clinton White House, which is the neocon Clinton White House, which is pretty much in control of the foreign policy side of things.
This is exactly what I've heard. I've heard that the State Department is basically it's not just the political appointees. Apparently, an awful lot of the permanent officers there, the civil service class in the State Department, the diplomats and those people. The State Department is apparently almost entirely dominated by neocon thinking. And if you go back all the way to 2016 to the election, I never forget how a lot of State Department officials wrote an open letter saying that, basically criticizing Obama for being and these were permanent officials, for being too soft and looking forward to the new hardline stance that Hillary Clinton, whom they expected to be president, would take. So the State Department appears to be ground zero for the neocons within the government. The economic ministries, as you correctly say, are completely different. They have a more realistic view of foreign policy, I suppose. The Defense Department looks like it's divided, with many of the top generals also steeped in neocon thinking. And as I understand it, the intelligence operation, the intelligence departments, the surveillance state, if you like, that apparently there is a division there in some of the departments between the, professionals who are very skeptical about much of what's going on, and the political appointees who are also apparently steeped in neocon thinking too. So, you have a government which is deeply divided, but with the neocons very much in control of the State Department.
All right, so to wrap up the video, we had Kamala Harris in France.
Absolutely.
So the border czar of the U.S. went to France to meet with Macron to lecture Lukashenko on the way he's handled the border between Belarus and Poland to lay blame on Lukashenko. She pretty much blamed, no, she definitely blamed Lukashenko for everything. So the border czar goes to France and blames Lukashenko for what's happening between the border between Poland and Belarus. You mentioned 2,000 migrants there. We have the reports in the UK that you have 1,000 migrants now crossing the channel every day. Since the beginning of the year, Alexander, you've had close to 24,000 migrants that have crossed the channel. And Kamala's in France. Is France launching a hybrid war against the Ukraine, against the UK? And why is Boris Johnson, this is more news, Boris Johnson is sending troops not to secure the English Channel, but he's sending troops to the border between Belarus and Poland in order to help Poland build a wall. I mean, the irony of all of this is
it makes your head
crazy.
It makes your head explode. A wall built, I mean, I should say, if Poland wants to build a wall, let them build a wall. I mean, I'm not, opposed to this. But of course, building a wall, which is what Trump wanted to do.
No, I'm saying Boris is sending UK troops to do that.
I know, but, building a wall on the Mexican border, that's outrageous. Building a wall in Poland. Well, we're going to send troops, British troops, to help with that. Sending migrants across the channel into Britain. That's fine. We don't object too strongly about this, but if 2,000 people camp on the border with Poland, well, that's outrageous. Also, the point to understand is all these contradictions. One of the things they do, and it's important people understand this, is that if you're a Kurdish migrant, if you're an Afghan migrant, you are not aware. You don't understand all these nuances. What you know is that Britain is taking 24,000 migrants. That's the story. Britain is a country you can get into. If you're from Latin America, you know that the US is a country you can get into. If you are, going into Germany and you're an Afghan, you know that Germany is a country you can get into. That is what is drawing all of these people to Europe, to the United States. And, coming around and saying suddenly, well, it's absolutely terrible when Lukashenko is directing migrant flows, all 2,000 of them, to our border. It's ultimately the migrants themselves who are heading there because they have been told and led to believe that, they are welcome in the West. You can't just turn this thing on and off as you please to suit your geopolitical plans, because migrant flows simply don't work like that.
Merkel, 2015. That's what she should go down in history for.
Merkel,
everyone come in.
Merkel 2015, and dare I say, the current bunch, the great border czar, Kamala, and the President Biden, 2020. I mean, what did they say? I mean, bring down this wall. I mean, all that. I mean, they reversed the policy, and we see the consequences.
Shouldn't Boris Johnson secure the channel, by the way?
Well, of course he should. Of course he should. You should be deploying those British troops where they're needed. I mean, that's what he should be doing. Of course he should. But if you have a consistent policy, if you say very clearly all across the board, look, these people are, we don't want them. We can't have them. If they want to come, there is a legal process that they must follow in their own countries. And we're going to examine each case and consider it by its merits in that kind of way. Well, that's a consistent story. But you can't just say, cross the Polish border, that's wrong. If it's an EU border, cross the EU border into Poland is wrong. Cross the EU border, in Bosnia, which is where a lot of them are coming from. That's good. You can't do it like that. Cross the Mediterranean into Greece and Italy. That's good. Cross it elsewhere. That's bad. I mean, that sends totally the wrong signal. Mm-hmm.
Bosnia into Croatia now as
into
well.
Croatia. Absolutely,
Yeah.
that's exactly.
That no
what's
one's
happening.
reporting on.
No, nobody's reporting on it. No.
Yeah. All right. Such hypocrisy. It's hard to keep track of it.
No, I know. But as I said, I mean, if you want to explain the riddle, go and look at what Blinken says. As I said, this is what it all comes down to. It's an attempt to use these events in order to create a sense of crisis in Eastern Europe. I'm not quite sure what the end result is, but certainly it's to keep tensions with Russia high.
And it's a real shame because Poland has good relations with Belarus. Ukraine has and had good relations with Belarus as well. There's no reason to go down this path. Okay, fine. Leave Russia out of this because we all understand the dynamics there. But as far as Belarus is concerned, they had good relations with all their neighbors.
They had very good relations with all their neighbors. They had very good relations with Ukraine. So good, in fact, that the Russians were annoyed by it. I mean, they were annoyed by the fact that over the conflicts in Ukraine, Belarus seemed to be edging towards taking the Ukrainian side because, they wanted to balance out their relations. Well, that's ended.
Yeah. All right. The Duran.locals.com. You'll find a link down below. The Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code Real News and Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, and Super U. Take care.